so I don't. Yeah, we're going to begin. So again, I'm Carl. I'm at Broadway Christian Parish here in South Bend. I'm going to go back to the screen to talk a little bit about what we do at Broadway and the different services that we provide that are going on there. Yeah. Slide it over. So Broadway does a lot of different hospitality ministries, and I've got here one of our trifolds that summarizes with some photos, some of the things that we do. Food pantry is the first thing that has been the longest running thing at Broadway, and we've seen a lot of people in need, especially this past winter, as prices have gone up. It's made it a lot harder for people, and we've seen a big increase in need there. We have 5 different part-time staff who work in these different areas. And so you see a photo of Reed there. We also serve a hot breakfast to people in the community. And so you see our breakfast chef, Vicky. And we lost all of our meal teams at the start of the pandemic because they were mostly elderly retired people who didn't feel safe coming in. So we've had to hire someone to cook our breakfast. And we're back to getting volunteers coming in to help out. We have a low barrier shelter program called Motels for Now that started in the pandemic. And so that decreased our numbers from 150 people a day down to 70 and then down to 30 a day during the nice weather. But during the winter times and now as the economy is struggling, we're up to over 80 now a day that we're serving breakfast to. In addition to that, you see there we do different medical providers come in to be able to help provide complimentary services for people. And we also have a clothing pantry that provides services for people, clothing for them that they need. And we also give out things like bus passes and hygiene products. And then maybe the most unique thing that we do at Broadway is a mail services. People can pick up their mail. Because if you think about it, if you don't have a safe, stable, secure place to get your mail, checks, packages that you're worried about, that's a huge service that Broadway provides. And so we have about 800 folders for people, and we get about 40 to 50 people a day who come in to check their mail. And that's been a great way to serve not only people who are struggling, but people in our community who continue to use that. We're trying to, and we'll talk about this more later on, not just help people in the crisis of homelessness, but really try to help people be able to move forward with their lives. And so our community advocacy program helps people get lost documentation that they often need to get into housing or to find jobs, and sometimes even help people relocate. If they're not from South Bend, we try to get people back to where they have family, friends, and a support system to be able to work with them. So that's an important part of what we do. We also do a special Jubilee project once a year. I know we've got one person on this small group, Scott from Grace UMC, one of our partner churches, that's been a big help with that. And that's been a chance for us to pass out toys to kids that are in need. And we work this year with different partner organizations to make that more efficient. This is just some more information about who we are and a little bit about my background also. We do worship services also, and we have a number of guests who come to be a part of that. It was hard when we were doing online only church to be able to engage the community, but now that we're back to doing hybrid services, it's been a great way for those who are immunocompromised or sick to be able to still be able to get the support and care that they need, but then also be able to connect with the spiritual community. And you see some of our other community partners that we're a part of that have helped us through this pandemic, especially the Department of Health has done a huge role in being able to help us get connected. I'm in my 5th year here at Broadway and have really enjoyed it. The other thing I want to show you for an overview of what we do is this is from the beginning of last year, the statistics on all the people that we helped. And so as I mentioned, we had breakfast. I compared this to our December stats. And so the biggest changes we saw was we went up about 33% in a breakfast meal. So by December, we're serving about 1,200 breakfast meals. That was a huge increase. And then our food bank, you see there at the bottom right, is up over 400 families that we're serving a month. So a 300% increase there. And so it's been a huge strain on our resources, but we're trying to find more partnerships and more ways to be able to engage with people who are in need of our community. That gives you a snapshot of the people that we help each month. And then finally, we have a annual report that we put out. If you've ever been to Broadway, we used to have playground equipment from the 1950s, those big cement cylinders. And so we've just taken those out. And so one of the things that we're working on right now with a special grant is we're putting in composting and expanding our community garden, our vegetable gardens through Unity Gardens to be able to provide more food to our community also. And I'll put a link in the chat if you want to read more about the history of Broadway and all the things that have gone on there. There's a lot of foundations that have supported us and the groups that have helped us out over the years. And it's been a wonderful celebration of what God is doing. And one of the things we often publicize is our current needs list so that people know what are some of the things that we need. A lot of people are in positions to help out. It used to be we wouldn't do food drives because we get everything pretty cheap from the food bank of Northern Indiana. But with the pandemic and especially with the economy currently, the food bank is running out of stuff to be able to provide us. And so when people have the ability to donate items, it's been a great way for people to be able to help out and to be able to work together. And then the other thing I wanted to show you in this annual report, some of our interns from IU South Bend in the Masters of Social Work program have been a huge help having interns. We currently have an intern from Ivy Tech who's here helping us. We have a variety of staff who work. Here's some of our year-end stats that highlight everyone that we helped. But I wanted to scroll down to the finances, which are here to talk about so you see all the different donors that have helped out over the years. And so we have a pretty small spiritual congregation, but a huge number of people who help out and to give and contribute. And so that's been a big blessing to us. So that's a snapshot of Broadway. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean so he can tell you a little bit about his program in the North Judson Kids Closet.
North Judson is located in Stark County, and I think it's good looking at both Broadway and Kids Closet because these are two different approaches to outreach ministry. Broadway Christian Parish has a very specific community, and they try to meet a broad amount of needs, where Kids Closet has a very specific need that we meet over a broader area because we serve the entirety of Stark County. So what we do at Kids Closet is we meet the needs of children from birth to 18. By the name, it is primarily clothing based. So when we are contacted by a family and there is a need, we provide several outfits per child. We also, as part of that, do a annual winter coat giveaway to give winter coats and other cold weather supplies away. The picture you see is from that event this past year. But we also meet additional needs other than just clothing. We also do school supplies, and again, we do a annual school supplies giveaway, a pack a backpack event, and that serves about 500 students a year within Stark County. And then we will also meet other needs as they arrive. If there is a special request, we try to meet that. A good example of this is last year there was a young man, teenager, who needed steel toe boots for a vocational program he was in, and so we tracked down steel toe boots for him. We work with Child Protective Services, and when a child has to be pulled from a situation and placed in with emergency care, and maybe with a relative who's not really quite prepared, we have some beds on hand ready to give those families so that they can take a child in immediately. We are looking at expanding into providing car seats because that's been shown that that's been a need that in this area. So essentially, if a child needs it, we will find a way to provide it. That is what we do. Some of the nuts, so to go over some of the nuts and bolts of the process of how we do this. Again, the idea of sharing this with you is to inspire what you can do in your local context. So these are just this is how we do it. So as you begin to think about what needs you want to meet and how you can serve your community, these are some of the details, how we work through some of the details with what we specifically are doing. So we do work directly with the families. They will, they we put numbers, our number out there everywhere we can. We try to promote Kids Closet as much as we can. People will call the church. We have a dedicated mailbox for Kids Closet. And then, and we have volunteers who work, it's broken up, who has it each week to do intakes. So once someone calls, this volunteer will contact them and work directly with the family to find out exactly what the child needs. So it's not exactly, it's not like there is someone calls and says they need help. We just have a pre-filled out thing that we give them. It is customized to the needs of the family. We do rely on donations from the community. There are 2 donation sites in Stark County. We have one at our facility for Kids Closet, and then we also have one at Knox United Methodist Church in the county. And so that is where a lot of the clothes that we were able to give out come from. But we also just do fundraising and put grants so that when there are other special needs like the steel toe boots, we have the funds available so we can meet whatever need that there is. It only works because it is volunteer driven. It needs a lot of volunteers to make it happen. And we currently operate out of a dedicated facility, as we'll talk about later. The Kids Closet started in the church in kind of one room in the church basement. And within a year, we grew to 2 rooms and then to half a church basement. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of got too big for the church. And we ended up with a community partner providing a former business that they had owned, and then they sold it to us at a greatly reduced cost about 2 years ago. So we have a dedicated facility that we operate out of now. The donations are brought to this facility. They are processed by volunteers who kind of go through them, and then clothes are organized and sorted. Other volunteers will then take the intake orders and will pack them. And then once they are ready, another team of volunteers will then contact the families to arrange delivery. That's what you can see. This is a picture of. That is a bunch of clothes that are ready to go to Knox, which is the town over, so that they can be distributed from there. And it used to be that pre-pandemic, we would actually arrange to go to the homes to make the deliveries. Since the pandemic, we've transitioned to working with partner churches all around the county. So we have churches that we work with in different areas, and we'll arrange to meet the family at that church so that the kids can try on the clothes, make sure it is what they want. And so we deliver the clothes directly to the child, so that it's not, the idea is not just a you call and then get a service. We try to personalize it as much as possible, and there is connection with the people every step along the way. So we as we'll talk about, we talk about why we do it. We really do try to view the people we help as people, not as projects, and that's kind of really important to Kids Closet. So that is what we do.
Great, thanks, Sean. So it's some initial time for questions, things that we kind of did a quick overview. So if you had any more in-depth questions or comments, we have a little bit of time. So just unmute or feel free to use the chat if you'd prefer to just type your questions or comments in. Go ahead, Marcia.
We have a country church that's located about 3 miles outside of LaPorte Door Village. Do you have any advice or suggestions for how we can reach out to the community? We have had dinners and food pantries in the past, and of course, there is no way for a lot of these people to get to our church. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions for how we can reach out to them.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that and that process. But I would initially say involves probably starting by figuring out what are the needs of the community. What are the needs that people have around you, especially if you're in a rural area where things are spread out. That can be sort of hard, but you have to think about what are the needs, whether that involves kids, like what Sean's talking about. Probably not dealing with a lot of people who are homeless in situation, but there could be food insecurity or other resources that people are struggling with. And then pairing with that, the other thing you think about is what are the strengths that you and your congregation have to offer. You have a physical building, and both Sean and I have talked about how you can leverage that physical building to serve the community, but you also have a lot of people with different passions and interests. And that's what we'll kind of talk about and build on what Superintendent Marty shared about Esther, is understanding where God's called you and what skills and abilities and interests you have. Sean, anything else you'd add in response to that?
Yeah, I would just add much to that. I think the starting point is what it is you all collectively, or maybe as an individual, are super passionate about. Because if you start with just how can we start meeting a need without really being passionate about it, it's going to fizzle pretty quickly. Because I think in all outreach ministries, I think the basis of what makes them work is modeling that sacrificial love of Jesus. We have to give a lot to help other people, and if we're not passionate about it, then it's not going to work. So I think that's the starting point, is not just identifying the needs, but what need are we passionate about? How do we want to make a difference? And I think that's the starting point.
That's great.
Thank you.
And then, well, it's a great question, Marcia. Thanks for asking. And this is supposed to be a community collaborative effort. So if other people have comments in response to Marcia, or you have another question, feel free to unmute or put that in the chat. Okay, I see one from John in the chat. Do you guys use Care Portal as well to help with the kids, Sean?
I'm honestly not familiar with what Care Portal is. John, could you explain a little bit more about that? Or anyone who knows anything about Care? I've never heard of this. Could you?
Yeah, I
I'd love
haven't
to
either.
hear more.
We'll have to look into that. I know the conference uses a helpbetter.org is one site that we've gotten connected with that they're trying to promote. I'll just put up here on the shared screen. I just Googled careportal.org, but I'm not familiar with that at all. So that may be something that we need to look into. So thanks for sharing that. But yeah, betterhelp.org is another collaborative work that our conference is doing to help have a website that people can go to get help and find out about resources. And I don't know, Sean, have you connected with BetterHelp?
We have not. I have to stress one of the things that with Kids Closet, and we have a very narrow focus, and our demographic is Stark County, and we just cannot expand any further beyond Stark County. So we kind of got our area, and have kind of stuck to that. And we've not done a lot of connecting with a lot of outside resources, because the couple times we've done that through some regional northern Indiana stuff, we start getting requests from LaPorte or Valparaiso, and we can't do that.
Yeah, no, the nice thing about the BetterHelp is it's meant to just let people know who can go to different sites and not try to expand things, but just let people know if you're in Stark County, here's a resource that you have. But all right, see another comment from Karen. Yeah, South Lawn is one of the ones that has helped us in a lot of different ways. And she also has relatives in Stark County that support Kids Closet. Yeah, we depend, I mentioned Grace earlier. South Lawn's another South Bend congregation that helped us out. And we depend a lot upon that. And in the past, Broadway was an actually ministry designation that UMC churches could designate funds directly to Broadway, and South Lawn and Grace and many others did that throughout the conference. I know they've changed that format. So now that list that you saw when I shared our annual report, churches and other organizations give directly to Broadway, not through the conference. And we appreciate that support. Any other comments or questions about what we do at Kids Closet or at Broadway before we move into the why of why we do these things? All right. I'm going to share my. Oh no, you're going first, Sean. Go ahead, Sean.
All right. So why we do it? Of course, we'll start off with the scriptural basis, and I think these are probably the three scriptures that we look at for our motivation. I'm sure you're familiar with most of them. With James chapter 2 about how we live out our faith through the works that we do. When we really look at this one, if brothers and sisters without clothes is what we focus on, and help just to go in peace and keep warm, we've done nothing. What good is that? So we have to put our faith into action. We really put a lot of focus on Matthew 25:40 and that whole parable about the sheep and the goats and about loving the least of these. And when we do that, we love Jesus. And then and I copied the Matthew 9:14, which I clearly copied wrong. That is Jesus saying, that's when Jesus says, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them. So, we've really focused on children. So the scriptural basis to put that all together for Kids Closet is we've identified the least of these in our community as children in need, and we answer the call to love them by meeting their physical. And so there's a kind of kids closet philosophy, is that it is about more than clothes. This is one of, as for North Judson Methodist Church, this is one of the main ways that we see ourselves as fulfilling our mission to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Because through Kids Closet is one of the primary ways that disciples of Jesus Christ are transforming the world and transforming our community. This is how one of the ways that we express our love for God is through how we love others. And so Kids Closet has extremely high standards in what we give out. And we go with all the donations that come in, they are gone through to make sure they meet these standards. And the reason for this is because we don't, the kids the children that we help, often they're used to getting hand-me-downs. They're used to getting whatever they can in the greater family network, whatever's left, that's what they get. And there's a story that from early on in the beginning of Kids Closet, kind of when we first really started expanding to providing more than just school supplies and more than just one or two things, but really providing for kids in whole. And one of the volunteers went to the house to deliver clothes. The child tried everything on, and these were a lot of instances. This was the first new clothes this child had ever remembered having. After trying everything on, the child didn't put everything back in the bag and said how much I love it, but then kind of looked down and said, "But my mom can't afford any of this." And we also and then just when told so that you don't have to buy it, that it is theirs, that because we love you, because God loves you, and we're giving this to you. Just the way that child lit up, that kind of captures why these standards are so high. Because often when people donate, they tend to donate out of their excess, and what we want to give to people is our best. So we spend a lot of time kind of weeding through the donations to make sure that only the stuff that is new or like new, the stuff that is what is given out. Because in doing so, we are meeting some non-physical needs. By because again, the children that we are helping, they often get hand-me-downs, and especially the old elementary, junior high, high school, they know that the clothes they're wearing are not like the clothes that other people are wearing. They feel called out. They feel less than every single day. So by being able to provide for them clothes that are of a quality that matches what everyone else, that does not feel like a hand-me-down, it does lead to an improved self-image and self-esteem. It helps provide feelings of dignity, a feeling. And when we were able to say that you don't have to pay for this, we are giving this to you because of out of love, it gives feelings of being valued, that they are cared for by others. So that's really, I think that's at the heart of the kids closet philosophy. It's not about just, it's about more than just meeting the need. It's about more than clothes. It's about creating that feeling, those feelings of being valued. And so that is a huge thing. And you can see here, you can kind of see a bit of our facility. This is from when a youth group from Bible Baptist Church in Knox volunteered to help out at Kids Closet, and those boys are packing up a bunch of pants. It gives a little bit of the of how it looks. So that is why we do it, and that's our philosophy.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Broadway has a lot of similar things that we've tried to do that try to value people. One of the things that happened, though, when I first got to Broadway was we had this tendency to, when people had problems, because we're dealing with people who are dealing with active drug use, mental health problems, criminal history, lack of education, trauma. We have a lot of problems that come up. And there was two tendencies that I saw at Broadway, either where we wanted to ban people and just kick them out. If someone upset us or frustrated us or wasn't polite, staff wanted to just ban someone, kick them out for a week, 30 days, some other amount of time, whatever they just felt like in the moment. And there was the other extreme of just tolerating behavior, where people felt threatened and uncomfortable, and people didn't feel safe being there. And so we had these two extremes of banning and tolerating everything that wasn't healthy for anyone, for staff, for volunteers, or for our guests. And so one of the things that I've tried to talk about is the idea of grace. An idea of grace is sort of a middle way that still has consequences, that still has challenges for people, but it gives people the opportunity to be able to grow and to be able to develop. And so when I think about why we do the things that we do, I talked about grace as a third way between that punishment and shame and a tolerance, minimizing or excusing. And one of our MSW students wrote a whole paper on this. And I just want to read a little bit about what he says about grace to help us think about what it means to practice that. He says, grace is a biblical concept deriving both meaning and function from divinity. Grace, therefore, is not a human concept nor attribute, and its divine nature makes it impossible for humanity to emulate and practice. Human beings are limited in patience and ability, and these shortcomings impede on service delivery to fellow human beings. Broadway has staff who are still human in nature, and because conflict is bound to happen, staff often fail to represent the model to its fullest extent, as is sanctioned in Holy Writ. Guests tend to strike the nerves of the staff, provoking some of the crude in-the-moment responses. Staff have quit as a result of being pushed too far. These human attributes compromise the standards of a well-meaning model. And so it's recognizing the challenges that we face to be able to show grace and how hard it is in a continuing learning process that we have to go through. So I talk about why we try to practice grace, but recognize that it's still a struggle that we go through. And it's something that we work on. One of the models that he talks about in that paper is the harm reduction model, the idea about helping people before they get clean, before they're deserving of help, but helping people in the messiness of what they are going through. And that's been a challenge for us at Broadway to figure out how to do that. And when we talk more about community partners a little bit later, it'll highlight the ways we try to collaborate with others, because we're not skilled to help people in every sort of problem that they deal with. And so we recognize our limitations and that need for grace. I don't know for Sean, if you've ever run out of stuff, but it happens to us regularly at Broadway. We run out of clothing, we run out of food, we run out of bus passes. We have to tell someone, sorry, that's all we have. And it breaks our heart. And that's part of the limits of grace that we've had to recognize, is that sometimes we have to point people in other places. Sometimes we have to tell people to come back tomorrow. That's part of the challenge of grace that we have, that we depend on God's grace also, because we're not perfect and we don't have limitless supplies. Given this reality of grace and the fact that we all fall short of it, we've tried to come up with ways that we can practice a gracious, restorative justice environment. And so the other document that I wanted to show you is what we call some of our de-escalation cards. I've made these into playing cards that guests can have. I've made these in little tabletop tent things that we have on all of our tables where people eat. And these are also cards that we give out to people when they're having problems, and have used this as a training material for even our staff and our volunteers. So these are 4 different things that we've helped people think about. When you get stressed, when you get anxious, what are some things that you can do to help resolve situation? And so we use this preventively with staff to figure out when they start to get frustrated by guests, when they're getting overwhelmed by the work, what can you do to be able to find encouragement? And then we also use this with guests when they've been asked to leave for the day. Instead of just banning someone, we'd say, well, let's figure out what can you do to help prevent this problem from happening in the past? Which of these is most meaningful for you? And we develop an action plan so they come back into community. And instead of just excusing the problem, we say this, we can't have this keep happening because it's threatening other guests, it's upsetting to staff, it's keeping us from doing what we've been called to do. What can we do to help you be able to resolve this in a safer, a better way for the community? And I've tried to pick a visual because not everyone has a high literacy rate among the people we serve. And I've tried to include an optional Bible verse from Psalm 23 so that there would be a spiritual grounding also to what we do. And so instead, if someone, let's say, threatens someone or breaks someone and we ask them to leave for the day, depending on how severe the problem is, I'll meet with someone outside of Broadway 1 to 4 times, depending on how serious the problem was, before I feel comfortable letting them back into community. Some people, it's just one time, having to meet with me outside, come to Broadway, talk about one of these strategies, decide what they want to do, and then leave, knowing that they can come back the next day to come into Broadway. That's pretty significant. If someone's willing to show up at Broadway, talk to me outside, talk about their problems, figure out an action plan, and then leave without coming inside the building, that is a big way to show that someone is truly repenting, wanting to change, and wanting help to be able to be a part of community. Sometimes it takes up to 4 times of someone coming back to be able, where we have an action plan and where we feel comfortable because of the history of trauma a lot of people go through, often going back to when they were kids, kids that Sean deals with. One of the other things I wanted to say about some of the challenges that we face is that we still try to practice grace by being sacrificial, so that someone may not be able to come into the building where we might have 50 to 60 people at a time, but we still try to make sacrifices to serve them. So we can bring them a to-go meal. We can bring them a day bag of food to take with them. We can still bring them out their mail or a change of clothing if that's what they need. Or maybe after we've closed to the public, we'll serve someone one-to-one afterwards. So those are ways that we try to practice grace by being sacrificial and saying, you're not able to be in community with people for various reasons, but we still want to get you the help that you need. And we're willing to make the sacrifice to be able to do that. And so that's one of the other ways that we have been able to practice grace and to be able to show that to other people who are in need. But it requires a cost to ourselves, and it's not always easy. The other part about why we do things is try to help people grow. And we use a great resource out of Chicago called the Homeless Librarian. Is someone else who does trainings for us that we share with our staff and volunteers. And these are also what our county librarians do in St. Joe County also. And so I'm just sharing my screen so you can see the most recent training that we did that included role playing, where we talked about 5 different things that we can do when someone is getting stressed, they're getting agitated, they're starting to cause a scene. What are 5 things that we can do to help calm situation down, to de-escalate in the moment? And so we got to learn about these things, and then we practiced them in role playing, where we would act out some of the scenarios we deal with guests regularly, who are getting upset, or getting agitated, are causing problems, or making threats, and different ways that we can then handle that and reduce that. And so this is part of the proactive work that we are doing to recognize that we want to be a place of reconciliation, that we want to practice restorative justice. and that we want to keep people from getting to a point where they are harming someone or even saying things that are threatening. And so these are our 5 tools that we've worked on that have been a big help for us, and part of that environment that we create a place, because our hope is not only that people at Broadway will then have a peaceful environment, but they'll be able to take these skills out into their community, out into the streets, to be able to practice them and share them with others. So that's some of the why of what we do. And yeah, I will share that PDF also. So that's a sort of a picture of why we do things at Kids Closet and at Broadway. Again, a chance to ask any questions or make any other comments.
What's the best way that you found to cast vision to your congregation so that they know how they can come on board and volunteer in active ways?
Sean, you want to go first? How do you cast that vision?
Yeah. So how about a little bit of the church support, I think, is critical. And I think one of the ways to cast that vision is sharing the wins, sharing the success stories. And so, when we can tell the congregation that there were 500 children in our fellowship hall over the past 3 days getting school supplies, that feels pretty good for them. And then so the next year we can remind them that coming up next 3 days, we're gonna have 500 children come here, and we need your help to make that happen. And and so we've not had problems. The very first year I was here, 2019, so started in July as Methodists do. So the school supply giveaway pack a backpack was 1 month later. I showed up ready to help. They sent me home because there was nothing for me to do the first night. There were so many volunteers. So I do think kind of just sharing the victories, not. And we're constantly working hard to keep Kids Closet from becoming a silo that kind of just does its own thing, but to constantly remind the congregation that this is part of who we are. And that takes a lot of intentional, repeated communication, a lot of celebrating the wins, just to keep reminding the church that this is not just something that we're doing. This is part of who we are as a church. And so there is quite a bit of, at this point, there's quite a bit of buy-in from the congregation into the work of Kids Closet.
I'll share that one of the things that I do on my Sundays is I share some of the Facebook photos that I try to take. So here's Broadway's Facebook page. And so I'll share from the past week, or if it's been longer, the month, of just what's going on, because a lot of my members aren't on Facebook or Instagram, where we also cross-post these. And so just going to share insights, and when members are involved, taking photos of them, helping out also. This has been a great way to be able to cast that vision and share with people all the things that God is doing throughout the week. And so that's been a very helpful way to be able to help cast that vision and share with people. I mentioned that the food pantry started 50 years ago at Broadway. 40 years ago is when they started a Sunday dinner. And that was the main way that members saw that there was a need for people to have a community meal. And it was a great way for those worshiping members to then interact with people from the community. Unfortunately, that was the major thing that stopped during the pandemic, because it had gotten to a point where Broadway didn't have enough members to put that on every week. And the other teams that were coming in, like our breakfast teams, didn't feel comfortable during the pandemic. And so that stopped. And we tried restarting it last year, but it kind of fizzled out. It kind of wasn't as necessary, and also hard to staff also. And so there's actually that's a problem currently at Broadway, is that our worshiping community is pretty separate from all that goes on during the week that I've highlighted. And it's a challenge, because the 3 years not only has aged everyone, but we're disconnected and people are dealing with their own health concerns. And so that's one of the big challenges, is that there's this big separation between the spiritual life of Broadway and all that practical hands-on ministry that is happening. And so I'm trying to find ways for members to get involved, to help out in small ways. Thankfully, it's nice to have guests still coming to the worship service. So it's a chance for people to be able to interact. And as I'll share a little bit later about, to remind people what the mission of Broadway is a big part of that. One of the distinctives at Broadway is we serve communion every week. That's been part of the importance for what Broadway does as a worshiping community. And that idea of welcoming everyone to the table, what they call radical hospitality, extends to the ministry. And so I often try to remind people when it comes time to communion, this is a part of what we do throughout the week. And this is what everything that we do points to, is that grace that God offers all of us. And you've heard me talk a lot about grace, and that's been the way that I try to frame all that we do at Broadway. But early on, though, people said that was too churchy of a word. And so I started using kindness instead. And so when I talk about with guests, I talk about being kind. When I talk with staff who are getting frustrated, I talk about being kind. When I talk with our members and those who worship with us on a Sunday, I talk about showing kindness. I use the hashtag kindness a lot also on Instagram to try to connect and remind people. So that's been the term that I really try to cast that vision and remind people about. But that was a great question. So thanks for that. Other comments or questions about why we do things at Broadway or Kids Closet? Anything else, Sean, that you want to talk about, why you do things, that you've given you a chance to reflect after what I shared? Are you good, Sean?
Yes.
Okay. The other why part then that I wanted to mention is about spiritual disciplines. If you remember a year plus ago, we had something in our district about spiritual disciplines that Kent led. And one of the things that we did out of that was we decided to adopt one spiritual discipline for the year. And so last year, 2022, was moments of silence. We would take a minute to just be silent during the sermon, during the worship service, during committee meetings, during prayer gatherings. We would take a minute to be silent. And so that was one of the things that we incorporated throughout all that we did to sort of help us cast that vision and be open to where God was speaking to us. And it was uncomfortable for a lot of people at first. They weren't used to doing that. Because one of the things I recognize at Broadway, as you can tell by all these activities, it's a very active group of people who have done lots of things to help people in practical ways for decades. So actually to sit and be still and be quiet and not do anything for just a minute was really hard for people. But by practicing that regularly and doing it throughout the year, we got up to by the December when we were doing 4 to 5 minutes at a time of just sitting and being silent and listening to God and reflecting. And so that was a very helpful way for us to take a practice, for us to deepen our vision and be open to where God was leading us. For 23, we've chosen scripture memory. So I'm choosing one verse a month that we are repeating in our meetings and our worship services, and doing some fun things like fill in the blanks. And so this month it's been Micah 6:8 about what does God require of us. And so that has been a good challenge for us to learn scripture and then reflect on how it applies to us, and for us to be thinking about justice and about mercy, about loving kindness and about humility. And so that has been the other thing that we have done to sort of hone our vision and reflect on all things that we do and how it fulfills that command that God gives us in Micah 6:8. Any other comments or questions about why we do things at Broadway or Kids Closet? All right, we're going to move on then to the how part of that. I'm going to share my screen again. I think I get to go first this time, right? So how do we make a difference? How do we make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? And we're starting to shift now into definitely want to hear more from each of you about your context. We heard one example already about a rural context, but want you to be thinking through What's the vision and passion of your congregation? I've talked a little bit about Broadway, but we're going through a shift. It used to be a lot more members lived in the southeast neighborhood of South Bend, but there's really only one that still lives here. Most have moved out to other places, whether it's downsizing, whether it's a need for a safer neighborhood, whether it's a assisted living facility. Not many people live in this neighborhood. And so one of the challenges that we're dealing with at Broadway is, are we still going to be a Southeast community church, or are we going to be more of a regional church for progressive families? That's one of the things that we're still debating and wrestling over and don't have a clear direction about. When you think about the mission of the church with clearly defined boundaries, I mentioned this earlier, but our guiding principle you see there on our website, that we are called by God to minister to the southeast neighborhood of South Bend, Indiana, believing in the sacred and equal worth of all people. We celebrate God's grace with acts of hospitality, love, acceptance, respect, service, and advocacy. These acts are rooted in our faith in Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit, and strengthened by our worship, which is centered on the Word and weekly celebration of the Eucharist. And so that has been Broadway's mission statement for a long time. That reminds them about who they are and where they are called. In the 80s, Broadway was a active church with AIDS ministries at a time when many people and churches were closing their doors to those who are HIV positive. Broadway was on the front end of welcoming people and caring for people who had AIDS, and for caregivers of those with AIDS or HIV also. And so they are very active. They developed that mission statement out of that. And at the time when the Reconciling Ministries Network was beginning, Broadway considered joining that or changing their identity to that, but was given the feedback that they were already so progressive that there wasn't a need to make a change, that they should just keep doing what they are doing. So it's interesting now that Broadway isn't as easily identifiable with the more progressive wing of our United Methodist Church. But I think with some of the challenges and changes and maybe eventual rulings that will come down the road, Broadway is going to continue to embrace that progressive identity. And so I think that's been part of the issue that we're looking forward to also as a congregation, is how do we welcome everyone in our community and really making everyone feel welcome. They've done that for decades with those who are homeless, with those who are struggling with addictions, and there's other marginalized, vulnerable communities around us that I know Broadway wants to be able to mention. And so that is a part of the journey that we are on as a congregation. The other part of Broadway is the fact that we are not just isolated, but being in a small city, there's lots of other services that we work with. One of the things that is discouraging to me, and if you read my brief bio, I've worked in urban centers in San Francisco Bay Area and also Chicago. Homelessness is a serious problem that has a lot of complex reasons and is not easy to solve either. And it felt like a lot of things we were doing initially at Broadway were just for people in crisis and weren't helping solve the problems at all. We were feeding people and we were clothing people, getting them a warm shower, but it wasn't addressing the problem. One of the benefits of the pandemic is it's given us more opportunities to collaborate with others and also get some one-time federal funding to be able to try to address some of these long-term problems. So the other document I wanted to share with you is what we developed as a map of resources, because one of the things that happened was we saw a lot of new people who are coming into South Bend. And so this is a map of expanded downtown South Bend, where you see Broadway down at the bottom in our location, and then a host of other services, shelters such as Center for the Homeless and Hope Ministries that are pretty restrictive. They do regular testing and have required classes that people have to go to. And then there was also different day centers like Monroe Circle that Granger Community Church runs that also provides breakfast and lunches, St. Margaret's House that works only with women, First UMC that did a lunch 3 days a week, and then different places that people could go either in the wintertime to stay warm or in the summertime to cool off. Our county library is open to the public, and then the Century Center, another community that we could direct people to as a place to go. And then Broadway only serves breakfast 4 mornings a week, Monday through Thursday. And so we have a partner organization, Our Lady of the Road, that serves the weekend breakfast for people. And so we wanted people to be able to easily navigate and find the other resources. And then on the backside, to give all the details about what goes on. And one of the things that we've been working to develop is understanding our how we do this, that we are serving people in crisis and helping them connect with other resources. And part of that is helping people move through a continuum. You see on here that there is weather amnesty that is mentioned. We have emergency group congregate living for people on the streets, where if they need to get out of the cold at night, there's a place they can go from 8 p.m. To 8 a.m. And so that was a way to be able to get people off the streets and give them some shelter. But it's pretty rough, and people sometimes even get kicked out of there and end up with frostbite. And we even had one guest who was banned from there who died this last week. So it's not an ideal situation. So one of the things that we used federal money for was to open this Motels for Now program. That is that low barrier temporary housing, where we've used a motel near the airport. We're housing 120 people in 2-person rooms. And that's been a great way to get people help. There's no requirement for drug testing, but it's a way to get people safe and then build relationships with them to get them into housing, whether that's at a place like Hope Ministries or Center for the Homeless or other programs. We have a number of detox facilities like Life Treatment Center, and then Oxford House is a statewide program that provides sober living facilities also. But the Motels for Now is often a first stop for people to get settled and to get some case management support. And then out of that, we've been able to find a lot of landlords to be able to help get people housed. And so we've had housing here on the east side of the St. Joseph River, out by the baseball field over here, some more housing that is developed. And so our goal is to move people into private rental situations. We have a one down by Broadway that we help get people into also. And so our goal is to move people along. And so one of the beneficial things at Broadway is we are helping people in crisis, but we've been able to partner with other organizations to help move people through when they're in need of housing, when they're ready for more services, and then move them towards independence. That's our goal, is that people will be able to move into private rentals, and maybe they'll continue to have a recovery coach. Maybe they'll still have a parole officer. Maybe they'll still be working on getting their GED. We'll get people the support services that they need and move them through that continuum. And one of the great things at Broadway is, because we've created this kind community, is that people then often come back because they want to serve and be able to give back. And so we have many people who come back to volunteer and help serve breakfast, to help out in the food pantry, to bring in clothing donations, because they've been helped by Broadway. And when they're in a position where they're able to give back to others, they want to be able to do that. We even have some of our staff who are former guests who used to be able to get services at Broadway, got support, got to a place of volunteering, and then we're at a position where they're able to be employed. And so that's the kind of kind community that we're trying to create, where everyone is welcome. We're helping move people through that gracious process to find support and find independence, and then be able to be a place that can continue to give back and help others along that journey. Sean, talk a little bit more about Kids Closet.
So when it comes to how we are effective and why we are effective, it's not really a slide for it, but it needs to be said that when the reason why Kids Closet is effective is because of the working of the Holy Spirit and the blessing of God. I mean, that is why. And especially early on, before I was at North Judson, the people who were involved can just tell you story after story of how they felt like they bit off more than they can chew. The ministry had gone beyond the scope, and God provided time after time again. They're baked into Kids Closet is a reliance on God's faithfulness, and that's the key to the effectiveness to begin with. When it comes to some of the nuts and bolts of the effectiveness, I think it really comes down to support. One of the keys to Kids Closet's effectiveness is the organic growth of it. I mean, it wasn't like 10 years ago when it started, someone came in with a business plan and was like, we're going to do this gigantic thing and start building it. It started with the current Kids Closet director, volunteer, saw the schools that in the winter there were these children coming to the elementary school without coats. And so it started by working with one elementary school to provide just coats for children who didn't have an adequate coat for the winter. Um, and then from there, the teachers began saying, well, we also have children who are in need of shoes. And so we started providing coats and shoes for one elementary school. And then, and then we heard from the teachers, and there are other kids who they come to school wearing the same pair of jeans every single week. And then next Monday they're clean, but they wear that same pair of jeans. They have one pair. So we start providing other clothes again for one school. And then from there expanded to school supplies. And then from there expanded to serve more than just one school, but to serve multiple schools. And from there began to meet other needs. So it grew organically. And if Kids Closet had just stayed at providing coats for just one school, we would have considered that a success, because we were meeting the need, and we were putting our faith into action. But as more needs were presented, the people of North Judson Methodist Church saw the needs, and they met the needs, and the ministry grew organically. And I think that kind of just seeing the needs and trusting God to provide to meet help us meet those needs. That is one of the why Kids Closet has been so effective. And so that then goes back to the church support has been absolutely critical, and the church supports the ministry in a number of ways. The church does support it financially. Early on, the church completely supported it financially, but a number of years ago, the scale of Kids Closet grew beyond what the local church can support. For instance, the operating cost for Kids Closet last year spent about $70,000 on providing supplies for children. And that was grant funded and donation funded. The church does provide some of the administrative costs, like for instance, the insurance for the building that Kids Closet is hosted in, that comes out of the church budget. And the church is very involved in the fundraisers that help support Kids Closet. One of the major fundraisers for a number of years has been a fish fry, and that is a kind of all hands on deck event for the church. Pretty much everyone who's a member of the church has some sort of involvement in that fish fry, whether they are breading the fish, whether they're donating desserts, whether they're working that day or selling tickets to, like, everyone is involved in that. So that event has kind of full church buy-in. And some of the most committed volunteers for Kids Closet come from the local church. In addition to kind of the volunteer director, some of the volunteers with the most hours in are from the church. For example, last year, to help try to recognize all of the good work that these people are doing, we signed up to be a certifying organization for the President's Volunteer Service Award. And so in 2022, one of the members of the church, they earned the Gold Award, which means they put in 500 hours in volunteering at Kids Closet in the course of a year. And there have been more, had more turned in hours. She was the only one who did it. But the church doesn't just support the ministry financially. They support it with their time. But then the support goes beyond just the church. We do have broad community support. Not all of our volunteers are from the local church. In fact, again, some of the volunteers who do the most are from outside of the church, out from other churches. We have partnerships with other churches. As I mentioned, we have churches that we work with to be sites where people can come to receive the clothes. The Knox United Methodist Church is one of our donation sites, and they do a lot of the same processing donation work. Another example of how we work with the community and other churches is there is a small it's a fairly small church out in the country called Fresh Faith Church. So again, not United Methodist, but every year they organize a fairly large fundraiser that brings in up to 10 other community churches to provide an event that where they give bikes. So it's a bike giveaway to kids. So that's what brings the families there. And then these churches are providing entertainment, they're providing games, they're providing different booths to sell food and drinks and other items to raise funds. And this raises, and so this is a church, a church that's not ours, that organizes all of this to raise thousands of dollars for the ministry. So Kids Closet really does have a full community buy-in for the vision. I saw the comment about the in-laws being in Stark County. A lot of people in Stark County know about Kids Closet, and we do get lots of support from the community. So it started within the local church. It is firmly rooted in our kind of United Methodist tradition of doing the good, of social holiness, but it really has become a vision that the entire community has bought into. And that's because of organic growth, the church's constant support, and being willing to reach out and gather community support. I think that's really what speaks to the effectiveness of Kids Closet.
One question, Sean, with that is, have you ever had to put limits on that organic growth and say, no, we're not going to start doing this when you're presented with some opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. There, for instance, we've mentioned that we're one of the things we're looking at is providing car seats, because that has been a need, and we've been working on how to do this for about a year. We were originally approached by Franciscan Health Network, and they had a program that they wanted to tie us into, but that was going to require more more volunteer hours than we thought we could provide, and so we had to say no to that really good opportunity because we just didn't have the infrastructure in place at that time. There have been some growing pains, obviously. Often, and there have been some issues with volunteers, people who want to do a lot. There have been issues where we've had volunteers who want to do too much, and so they kind of had a job to do, and then they would finish their job and they would start doing other stuff that other people had agreed, I'm going to come in on this day to do, and they would come and find the job that they had agreed to do was done, and that's not a great thing. That's because to have someone who wanted to give, who was committed to give 4 hours in an afternoon to come and find there's nothing to do, and so there have been some hard conversations to tell a volunteer, you've got to stop doing so much. There have been volunteers we've had to let go and tell them you can't help anymore, because this has happened where the people who sort the clothes, where the clothing does not meet the Kids Closet standard, but they're like, oh, my grandchild could use this, and we said pretty early on that that's not what this is about. The clothes we can't allow people to start taking stuff, because then that runs the risk of, well, if you see something and it does meet the standard, but you really like it, like, are you going to take it? It's an established, you can't do this. And there have been a couple instances where a volunteer does this. They are told, here's why you can't do this. And they do it again. And then they got to be told, you can't help anymore. And that is not a fun conversation. That has led to some hurt feelings,
Right.
But they were also necessary things to do.
That's so important as you all think about wherever your church is at and developing that vision. Organic growth, I agree, is the same thing's happened at Broadway, but you have to know what your vision and mission is, because there's going to be times when you're going to get sidetracked. You have to be able to say no. In contrast, at Broadway, it's actually kids stuff. Like, people want to bring us kids clothing, and we're like, no, we're really just working on adults. And so we turn people away and help them identify other places that can accept kids clothing, because we really only do adults clothing. We don't have many kids, thankfully, who are coming in with their parents, although we do have some. The other area has been with youth. I've done a lot of youth outreach in our neighborhood, and for a time, youth wanted to come and have breakfast. Well, it's really not a safe place for youth to come and have breakfast when they're around people who are convicted felons, some from convicted child abuse. It's really not a safe place unless I've talked to the parents and the parents have signed off on that. And so we've had to tell youth, better to go to your school and get breakfast there beforehand, and to try to do something else at a separate time with them. So having to say no and sometimes turn people away, and even volunteers. That's a great example, Sean, about knowing what your mission and vision is, and knowing your guidelines, and being able to have those hard conversations are so important. There's a little discussion in the chat about motels for now. So let me just go back to that. So motels, it works as a sign up that once a week they do a sign up at that Friday breakfast at Our Lady of the Road. And the wait list is about 300 people right now. There's a lot of people looking for help with housing. And the way it cycles is that people do get kicked out for even breaking some of the basic rules about things like no overnight guests, not destroying property. Those are probably the main two. And so that opens up spots for other people to come in, and they rotate roommates with people also. Sometimes there's someone who's been on a list for a long time, and they'll let us know that they're looking for them. If we see them at Broadway during the week, they'll come pick them up right away because they're trying to get into housing. If you're familiar with the program or the way it started 2+ years ago, was we actually had 3 sites that were set up, 3 different motels that at the start of the pandemic didn't have any customers. And so it was a win-win for them to house people in need. And it allowed us to separate people and to have one motel for families, one motel for people who were closer to recovery, and other people who are really struggling. But now we're down to just one motel that's willing to work with us. Thankfully, the housing authority was able to get all the families into supportive housing, because it's a pretty rough environment out there. And there's a lot of controversy over this program because there's a lot of active drug use that's going on, and active drinking. Some of the nearby businesses and residents have complained about the fact that there's 120 people who sometimes are wandering around now in their neighborhood. And it takes a lot of money to house those people in a motel that's getting pretty run down. It was already run down already. So there are some challenges about if funding will be extended by our county beyond March. One of the things that I've suggested to them is we may need more of a partnership model for guests who are getting some sort of income stream, whether that's disability or some other government check, that after X amount of time, you need to start contributing to your housing and food that's being provided for you, if this is the kind of living arrangement you want to continue in. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's still creating a lot of problems up in the air. So D. Henry, if that answered your question, great. If you had other questions, feel free to put that in the chat. And thanks for that resource, Seth. If people want to click the link, they can learn more about that program that he shared. Other comments or questions about how we do the ministries we do at Kids Closet or at Broadway? Another thing that I'll share with you then, is think about any other comments, is Broadway is working to try to replicate this model. As I mentioned, we've often been the place that not only United Methodists, but other churches and organizations focus their resources to help people in need. But the reality is, in a lot of ways, that's shifting and not the most helpful in our community. So a new document I created is called Churches Providing Housing Support, that sort of summarized the reality of where we're at here in the city of South Bend, where we have about 50 people spending winter nights in emergency shelter. There's a photo of the Nights In, the Motels for Now site that we're using out by the airport. Yep. We're pretty successful right now with only, I think, 2 people who have moved into private rentals out of motels have ever been arrested. So we're seeing a pretty good success rate with people not causing problems when they move out of the motels. And we started with about 60 people who had been homeless for at least 10 years in the motels. Now we're down to just 1. So we're able to help some of those people who have been chronically homeless get support and get assistance that they need. And we're still serving mostly St. Joseph County. It's dropped to probably about 75% are from Michiana. Because this has been so successful, we are getting more people from outside of our county who are coming in looking for helping with housing and resources, but it's been fairly successful. One of the things that instigated the motels was tent cities that were popping up in 2020 Here's a photo of one of those locations and how we've worked to get people housed. And so I've put this together for different pastors who want to better understand homelessness in our city of South Bend, and then also detailed all the complex reasons, some that I've mentioned in my discussion already today about why people are homeless, to try to create some of the empathy and understanding that we need. Oaklawn and Beacon Health have a program called ACEs that they are a part of, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and understanding the trauma that people go through as children often can lead to lifelong problems, and why people struggle and turn to destructive patterns of behavior instead of being able to what we think would be making the most help for them. So helping churches understand this. And then what I'm trying to do is to have more churches be able to develop ways that they can help people. And so we made a whole list of different ways that churches can help, because it would be great if more churches like Broadway or Monroe Circle or Our Lady or First Methodist would provide meals occasionally to their neighbors, would provide clothing to those in need around them, would provide mail services, would provide advocacy. And so trying to help churches think through, if they want to get involved, if you're in an urban area and want to get involved, this is sort of a continuum of more of ways that require more involvement, more commitment to be able to get involved. And so one of the programs there that you see mentioned is Bridge of Hope. Our Christian shelter, Hope Ministries, is training churches to help graduates move into private housing. And so there's 3 churches already that are working on that. And they've got graduates who have been through a 2-year program at Hope with lots of Bible studies and spiritual counseling, who are now ready to move into their own apartment, but they still need that relational connection and spiritual support. And so that's been a way for some churches to help one person, help one family. Sometimes it's women with children, to be able to get that and be able to move into independence. And we have a number of churches who are also just providing housing for people who are ready to be on their own with some of that support also. So one of my goals is to see more churches able to serve their community. I mentioned Scott from Grace UMC and here in South Bend is also on the call. They do a paper pantry, and that's been a great connection and resource, that if people are in need of paper products, we can direct them over to Grace, because that's not something that Broadway has, but something that Grace does have. And it's a great partnership to be able to know that we don't have to do everything, but we know where we can refer people who are in other needs.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions that people have about how we do things at Kids Closet or Broadway that you want to ask?
I'd just like to make a comment about the paper pantry, just fill in a little more information about that. Thanks for bringing that up. So I don't take credit for this program, but I've participated in it a few times. On the second Saturday of every month, Grace Church hosts what we call a paper pantry, and we give out paper products for free. People have to register, provide IDs. So we keep track of who's coming and make sure they're not doubling up, or they have the number of people in their families that they say they do. We give out toilet tissue, paper towels, hygiene products. And sometimes we have different types of products that we don't have every month, but we give them out as specials. And we did this ministry inside our church for 7 or 8 years, where we would actually have people come in, and after they registered, we had a room set up for them where they could have some coffee or cookies, and we could pray with them. And it was very popular. We would serve 200 to 300 families a month. And then when coronavirus came around, we had to shut down the indoor situation. And Pastor Carey, who was with us at the time, said, let's try doing it outside as a drive-in. So we've continued to do that. And we've actually polled our clients, and they say they prefer to do it outside. So we haven't brought it back inside. But we still get to talk with them a little bit when they drive up, and they can tell us, what their problems are. We also give out books every month to people, especially children's books for children. And it's been a remarkable success. There's one other like it, I think, on the north side of St. Joseph County. but we're very proud of that ministry. And it was Pastor Schrader, who was our pastor when we started that, and he was very committed to getting something that could be Grace's signature ministry, much like the Children's Clothing Project. And Broadway does several things, and we've supported them over the years. But it's been really rewarding to get to know some of these people. Some people we see every single month. Some people we only see once in a while. They line up well in advance, even though we never run out of everything, except we've had problems with laundry detergent recently. But it is, as anybody who's running a ministry like this out of a church knows, you have to get buy-in from your congregation. And we did at one point reach out and ask other congregations to help us, and we were not successful in that. So our congregation supports it with their finances. It's a couple $1,000s a month to hand this stuff out. It takes organization and getting the bags ready for them to pick up so it can run efficiently. But we've been doing it now for almost, I think, 9 or 10 years. And as long as the demand continues, we'd love to continue doing it.
That's great, Scott. Thanks for sharing some more details. I'll mention the other partnership and where we've tried to work together is Grace has a nice basketball gym in their former sanctuary. And with their new pastor, Jim Clark, we're hoping to try to figure out what that looks like and how we can, Broadway can help get some more youth over there for their basketball ministry. So yeah, I appreciate that partnership. Any other questions about how we do things at Broadway or Kids Closet? Before I'm really going to see if someone would be willing to share a little bit more about their church and where we could maybe give some input. We did that already with Marcia. If you were here at the start of the call, she asked about her rural setting, and Sean and I gave some feedback and insight. So I don't know if Marcia, if you have any follow-up questions after everything Sean and I have shared that you want to respond to, or if anyone else wants to share their context and what you're thinking about where God can use your congregation.
I actually did have a question, and that kind of leads into that.
Yes.
I go to St. Mark's in Goshen, Indiana.
Yeah.
St. Mark's United Methodist. Tony Brinson's our pastor. GoshenStMarks.org if anyone's curious. We have a partnership with the work release program from Elkhart County Jail. And so we have probably, I think, somewhere between 30 or 40 people from the work release program who come to our service every Sunday morning.
Nice.
And I was given a book by my pastor. I was actually out in California for about 2 years, north of San Francisco. And at that point, he gave me a book called Strangers at My Door, written by Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. And that was a book about a family who moved to the South and had a house that was a ministry house. So out of that, my idea has been to potentially have a house that is near the church that would serve the work release people. I'm curious if there's resources about if you're going to do this, what are the practical steps? Like, do you file as a tax exempt? Is that a good idea? Can you even? And what are the pitfalls? And are there grants available? Stuff like that.
Yeah. Great question. So the first thing that I would say is, are you familiar with Locked in Solidarity?
No.
So there is a group of Christians that meets to talk about helping people coming out of jail and out of prison. Here we go. I'll just share my screen. This is the easiest way to do this. This is from our Sunday bulletin. So there's 2 events that are coming up here in St. Joseph County. Oops, sorry. So the first one is this coming Friday, excuse me, at the county library, talking about reentry and how do we help people who are looking to reenter society. Returning citizens is the language that is being used, and that has been a great way to be able to think about helping people. And so if you're interested in that, sorry for messing around. Okay, so MHAMichiana.org is the website for Mental Health Awareness of Michiana that's putting this on. And so you'll see a number of people there who are talking about that. And so that'd be a great place to come and learn more about resources that are available and what that looks like, and other people who are doing that. And then there's a specific Christian one called Locked in Solidarity. That's at the Beacon, which is a church out by the airport. Riverside Church runs the Beacon Community Center. That they're doing something later next month about, from a faith-based perspective, what does that look like? We have our jail release program. It's called Dukem Center here in St. Joseph County, which is also by the airport and Beacon. And both Riverside Church and our church is a place where people from Dukem come for worship, and then also to find support services also. And so this would be another great event, Seth, for you or anyone else who's interested in working specifically with that returning citizen population,
All right,
to be able to get some information.
thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, yeah, to have like what a halfway house type situation is a great resource if you're thinking about doing something like that to help provide housing to people. I know a number of the churches that I've talked with and worked with who have set that up for people coming out of homelessness, but I think it applies here also. It's just important to be really clear about expectations and time length is the other thing. If you are providing transitional housing for people, or if you're providing long-term shelter. And churches can often get stuck with people who they thought would be moving on to their own independence, but like the situation. And so that's been the biggest thing that we've tried to work with churches on, is decide if you're just going to help increase the housing stock by providing 4 or 5 more units for people, or whether you're going to have a temporary limit for people so that you can move in other people who are also in need. So blessings on that work, Seth, and definitely keep us updated on how things go there at St. Mark's. Anyone else willing to share a little about their context, where you're at, and what you're struggling with, and what's the next step that you're wondering about taking? Because we can share collaboratively, and obviously you've heard from Sean and myself, we have a lot of experience with helping churches develop impactful ministries.
I'll just mention again,
Yeah.
that one of the things that the coronavirus did to all of us, I think we can all recognize this, as it severed our connections with people, both in our congregations and then also the people that we've been trying to help. And the big one for Grace United Methodist in South Bend was that we were actively involved with Project Warm and working at the overnight center with the homeless as it bounced around from location to location. It was at your church Broadway one year, it was at First United Methodist South Bend, the old Hope Rescue on Michigan, and it was in a couple of businesses. And we were routinely going on a regular basis and taking meals to share with these people, and then sitting and talking with them, doing a brief devotion, sitting and talking with them if they wanted to talk. And we really had some pretty deep connections with some of these people. And it really gave people in our congregation some perspective on, instead of looking at these people like a bunch of homeless people wandering around the downtown side, they were real to us. And when coronavirus hit, Hope Rescue Mission made the decision they had to, that they didn't want people to come in and be with these people, either to serve meals, even to bring meals, and not to commune with them. And we've never gotten back to what was happening before, since they shut that down. So we've been sort of relegated to doing what we can, which is taking donations of clothing to Hope Rescue Mission, trying to help them out that way. My understanding is that Hope is going to turn responsibility for that over to the Center for the Homeless next year. And I'm just wondering if you know what the model that the Center for the Homeless is going to adopt in terms of allowing people to come in and work with these people, if that's part of their plan. And also the other part of the Center for the Homeless has been that they're not allowing people in who are high or drunk. And that was part of what Project Warm, the predecessor to this, was different in, and it was allowing those people in those situations. Do you have any insight on any of that?
Yeah. You're asking good questions. All right. So let me see if I can pull up the document that you really want to see here. All right, here we go. So yeah, we have 2 sites right now where people can go for weather amnesty. And so here's the document. As Scott mentioned, there's 2 different settings. At the Center for the Homeless, it's a sober living, a dry site where you have to have a COVID test. And there's limitations based on your criminal history of who you can take. And they only have space for two men and 2 families in sort of their lobby and some of their extra rooms. The Old Salvation Army is an unused building that Hope Ministries is running. That's what we call like a wet setting, where it's a harm reduction. And the only limit is you get patted down. You can't bring in any drugs or weapons. But otherwise, if you can sleep it off and keep to yourself, you're allowed to be there, no other questions asked. But as I mentioned earlier, we've had people get kicked out for not following those basic guidelines. One frostbite, one died last week. And you see some of the other limits in there also. So that is very much the question about the center. There's a lot of skepticism about if the center is going to expand their offering next winter when they're the only site. They don't really allow outside groups. So I think that's even a harder hurdle to get over, Scott. And so one of the things that we're talking about already is offering other options. And whether that's at Our Lady of the Road, whether that's potentially even at Broadway, if we get enough renovations done, or whether there's a new intake center, but that's a couple years out, that's going to be built out on Nimitz Parkway, north of the airport. So yeah, that's definitely a big concern that after this winter, I'm already in conversations figuring out. But I was previously a 2-point charge with a church called Epworth Memorial out by the west side of South Bend. When we closed that, we looked at turning that into sort of like another shelter type place. And if United Methodists would want to try to help provide that kind of care that Scott is talking about altogether. And that was the start of the pandemic. And we didn't really feel like we had the people for that. We tried last year to put together a team of UMC people from various congregations to help do that Bridge of Hope program that I mentioned to help someone get into private housing. But I know Grace was going through a pastoral transition that was pretty rocky. And then other churches didn't really have people either. So we're looking to restart that and do something, what we call our UMC collective of South Bend, to be able to do something like Scott has described has happened with Project Warm in the past, to be able to collaborate together and not only help care for people physically, but build some of those relational and spiritual connections. So we're working on that, Scott. Those are all good concerns. Go ahead, Marcia.
A large part of our congregation is elderly. We don't have very many young families, so the volunteer group is not very large.
Yeah.
And we do seem to have a problem with getting funds. And I appreciated this site that Sean put up about the grants. So I'm going to look into that. A lot of I wouldn't say that the people are apathetic, but as comes with age, you just have so many more things that you're concerned with. And that, as chairperson of missions, I am struggling with how to find what we are passionate about, like Sean said. But it seems like when we do really have a something that we're doing, like we did the backpacks in LaPorte County. We've done that for 5 years now. The people really come around, they give, and they want to come and help load the backpacks up and give them away. So it's like we're good for one project for the year. So I just praying that God will help me, and if I can glean anything from what y'all say, to know how to help encourage people to want to participate more.
So Marcia, I'll mention that Kids Closet in North Judson Methodist Church, we are also an aging congregation, and most of the volunteers we have are retired because they have the time to do it. Wednesday and Saturday are the big Kids Closet work days. So Wednesday during the day, the younger families we have, they're at work, and Saturday they're at the soccer field or the gym or doing school stuff with kids. So we really do rely on volunteers who are older, and without them, we wouldn't be able to do anything. Because just being I know that when you get older, there are health concerns. You have to go, and it may go a little bit slower, but the work that people do here has convinced me that saying I'm older isn't a good excuse, because if you're older, you still got lots, God still has a purpose for all of us. And so we can still, the age does not limit how we can serve God. We can find a way to do it. It sounds like you have a good start with backpacks. And so there's clearly something is there about providing kids with school supplies. And so if there is just a kernel of passion there, that may be expandable. There may be ways to work with a local school. I mean, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but I don't remember, teachers put in tons of their own funds in school supplies for their classrooms. So it may just be adopting a classroom or 2 classrooms, and your church is going to be who loves that classroom. If the teacher needs something, they don't need to buy it. They come to you, and your church will make sure they have what they need. And that also provides the opportunity to pray for that classroom regularly, to pray for that teacher regularly. Again, don't need to start big, start small, and let God organically grow it. And so it sounds like you have a starting point, and I think there are some ways that you can easily grow that into something else that meets a bigger need.
Thank you.
Another thing I would add is about, thinking about the levels of commitment, like I talked about for different churches. Physical items, whether it's backpacks or clothing or food, is that first level of support. And I think the goal is always to get to a relational connection point where, like as Scott described about with the coffee time or the drive ups, or Sean described about connecting with the kids they're serving and making that home visit, building that relational connection, I think was that next step towards leading to spiritual fruit, to be able to know how to pray for someone, to be able to invite them to church, to build that community connection. That I find is the most often the challenging point, even once you get beyond identifying where you want to help people at. But building those relationships is really where God has allowed them to work, and where that Holy Spirit can move to build connections and to see some spiritual fruit. Yeah. So thanks for sharing your situation, Marcia. The example I'll give from my small church that closed, they like to do 2 events, trunk or treat, and then a Easter egg hunt. And so one of the things that we really worked on with both of those events, because those are the 2 things they really like to do, was make it more relational. So that we, instead of just having just candy being passed out, we started including more activities and had like a food room, so that people wouldn't just run through and get candy, but they'd get a chance to sit down, do some activities, connect with our volunteers and with other families also, have a story time as a part of that also. And so we took what were their passions, the things that this elderly small church wanted to do, and try to find ways to build those relational capacities, create opportunities for relationships to be built, so that it would be more meaningful and create more spiritual connections. Anyone else want to share their context? This is the last part of our training, is a chance for you to share where you're at, and for us to be able to give some feedback. I don't know, Sean, if you can see John's comment there in the chat, if you want to read that also, and we can see any responses that we want to give to that.
Yeah, so John, something I'll mention, there's an older member, he's retired, he is widowed. I have lots of conversation with him because he needs someone to listen, who listens to him, talk to him. And he'll often mention stuff like this, like he is too tired, he's too old, he's past this point. He's just ready to go home. That's what he keeps saying. And one thing I always say to him is like, well, God hasn't called you home yet, so you clearly have a reason why you're still here, and it's not to talk to me. So go do. I can tell him to go do something. But I think that's part of it, is that until God has a purpose for each of us. We look back at that sheep and the goats. Jesus didn't say to the sheep, you serve while you were young and healthy, you serve me. No, you serve the least of these. Until we reach that point, we still have a job to do. So I would definitely, I do try to push back against that, and locally, and I can point out here, just with we have a volunteer who earned the Presidential Volunteer Service Award. She has Parkinson's, and she's still able to do this. We have a man in his 80s who he is kind of like the building keeper for our facility, puts in tons of hours, and I get tired thinking about what he does. I'm half his age, so age is not an excuse. As long as we are drawing breath, we can serve our Lord and Savior. And so I guess I've heard in the whole, I'm getting to, I've heard my entire life, but seeing the people here, how they buck that trend, has really kind of inspired me to not accept that as an excuse anymore.
From one of my other churches that was intergenerational, some strategies that helped us keep that older generation engaged with the families and young people. One thing is praying for the youth. And so asking some of these older retired people who are ready to check out, well, is there one youth you'd be willing to pray for that we could assign you and give you a prayer update each month about them? That was a way that sometimes would be a small step to build that connection. Another was to encourage the grandparents to think about what kind of church did they want their grandchildren to have, given that vision of not just the kids in the church, but for their own grandchildren, to think through that next generation, what would be meaningful to be able to minister to them, to help motivate them. And then the third thing we did was with the youth was going out and doing often yard projects, whether it was shoveling or raking or mowing, going out and serving some of those older people when they felt disconnected and felt uninvolved, to take the young people out and start with a service project, to take that initial step to serve them and to care for them, and then use that then as a springboard for them to think about how they wanted to give back and how they wanted to be involved in the community. So just a couple ideas to kick around. And if anyone else has any other things that they found effective or ideas, feel free to comment or unmute on John's question. And Scott gave a good article. Thanks, Scott.
Paula, do you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say that part of what could be happening too is that you've got sort of burnout. I mean, I know that it's the 20/80 rule. I get some people get tapped for everything. And it's sort of that outreach, inreach, like you still have to nurture your congregation in order to go out. So there's that going on. But, I don't, and maybe they don't want to go to certain events. Maybe it's something they can do at home. Maybe it's like Marcia, maybe you have older people that can knit or make mittens, and they write a note, and then that just starts, starts the connection somewhere, or they feel like they're doing something without even being part of some big event that they have to drive to. It doesn't always have to be big.
That's good encouragement, Paula. Thank you for sharing that. I'll go back to what Superintendent Marty started us with, her devotional on Esther. I think it definitely applies in this context. We were challenged to think about what's our calling for you and for your missions committee or for your congregation. What's your calling? Both Sean and I have talked about that. Marty encouraged us to think about both our works of piety, our private faith, and where do we need to be spiritually growing and maturing, but then also our works of mercy, and where can we be public. And sometimes we need to think about her challenge also about where is there procrastination? Are there things that we need to stop doing that we no longer have the people or the energy to do, that we need to stop, and we've been putting off letting a ministry die? There can be procrastination there, or even procrastination having hard conversations about how do we grow our church how do we turn things around? I know that's one that Broadway is currently struggling with procrastinating. And then the final thing that Marty shared us with is finding one thing today. Remember, you're going to go home and hopefully you're still home and eventually go to sleep tonight. What's the one thing from today that is going to give you a sense of satisfaction, of moving forward, of a sign of God's grace? So think about those questions she started us with as you reflect on everything that we've talked about today. Last chance for any people who want to share their context or struggles before I'm going to ask Sean to close our time in prayer. Last chance for anyone. Go ahead, Paula.
I just want to make a final comment. I thought this was really, really valuable. And Carl, you were able to pull stuff up, and just the sharing that happened today. I don't know. It was very, very useful and encouraging. So thank you.
You're welcome. We're so glad to be able to share what God's doing, and excited to see how God's going to be using all of you. Any other final comments or questions? All right, Sean, will you close us in prayer then?
Absolutely. Let us pray. Good morning, God. We are thankful for this day, and we are thankful for the opportunity to serve you. God, I pray that your blessing and your Holy Spirit be upon these people here and the churches that they represent. May you give us all a passion to love you by loving others. May you guide us, and may you show us how we can love the least of these in our community. May you empower us, and may you enable us to dream big dreams that can make disciples and transform the world. We trust in you, and we wait on your guidance. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.